Welcome. Nice to see the faces. Thank you for introducing on what we're doing. So as we're getting together today, we're going to go through a little bit of our an opening, answer some questions about what we do in the beginning. Each of us are going to take some time to share with you from our different perspectives on our topic today. And we will be also leaving plenty of time for question and response. So as you're coming in and you're planning your time together, this webinar is scheduled for 90 minutes. And we always leave our last 30 minutes available for a really beautiful roundtable discussion. When we go into our question and response, we'll invite you to join us and so we can see your face to have a dialogue. But if you prefer to keep your video off, you're welcome to. And I just wanted to give you a heads up that that will be part of our time together today.
Maija, shall I get started?
Sure.
So again, welcome. My name is Charlene Eigen-Vasquez, and I would just like to call in the 4 directions as we settle in and think about this conversation that's about to begin. Creator, I humbly sit before you and call in the 4 directions. To the north is the place of winter. The north is a place of mental health. The north is the home, the old ones and those gone by. To the ancestors and the elders and the grandparents of all living beings, we ask for guidance. North is a place of wisdom. North is a place of the white buffalo, the snow leopard, the moose, and the beaver. North is the direction of the cold, the winds, the strength, the courage and fortitude, the might, focus and purpose. North takes us to the mountaintops, a place of clarity, foresight, communion with all that exists. North reminds us to be humble and to be generous. We invite the spirits of the north to join us in community and prayer. To the east is the place of spring. East is a place of spiritual health. The east represents fire. The east is where the sun rises. East represents new beginnings, hope, promise, and potential. To the east, we pray for our babies and those to come. We invite the wind that reminds us of the awakening of life. May our eyes be filled to see the freedom of the birds. May our thoughts be in awareness of the gifts before us today. We invite the spirits from the east to join us in community and prayer. To the south is the place of summer. South is a place of emotional health. South is the direction of Mother Earth. South is the direction of warmth, growth, and fertility. South brings us creativity and productivity. To the south, we find teachings of relationship, music, dance, and art, all of those things that carry joy. South is the direction of our youth, those just making their way, those seeking knowledge, those seeking stories and collecting them. We look to the south for health, wellness, and harmony. We invite the spirits of the south to join us in community and prayer. To the west is a place of autumn. West is a place of physical health, comfort, and security. West is the place where the sun sets. West is a place of rest. The west is the place of the dream world. The place of closure and place of endings. Everything that needs to happen in order to inspire new beginnings. West is for adults who are paving the way for future generations. To the black bear, the brown bear, and the raven. To the water, to the sage, and to autumn. We invite the spirits from the west to join us in community and prayer. So before we begin, I just wanted to make share a few things. So number one, at the end you'll find, so our intention is really just sharing. And at the end, we're going to be offering some resources for that'll help to support the discussion that we're about to have. I also want to make mention that for some of our webinars, there's a small fee. And for those who can't afford it, we do have sliding scales available. We can also sometimes provide a bit of a scholarship to waive fees. And that's because we have fundraising that goes through our affiliate, the Healing and Reconciliation Institute's Indigenous Governance Program. And we do this to make sure that we don't miss anybody. We want to make sure that our goals are met and that we're contributing to the community. Of course, depending on needs and depending how big a project is, we also have fee for service, but that's not the main reason that we're here. We're here to share information. So if you have any questions that come up during the webinar, please share them. And if you need assistance, please reach out to us privately with a specific project so that we can make arrangements to give you assistance. And assistance meaning something pops into your head as the webinar is going on and you're thinking, oh my goodness, I could probably have some help there. Feel free to reach out to us. We will do our best to make sure that we can assist as needed. And if it's a big project, we do our best to raise money to help support whatever needs come up. So I just want to make sure that everybody understands it as we move forward. Thank you. Now on to introductions. So I haven't really introduced myself. And I'll wait for the picture because that's what we're told to do. So my name is Charlene Eigen-Vasquez, and I am sitting here in Gilroy, California. I'm a member of the Ohlone Nation. I'm also of Mexican descent. I come from the village of Chitoktok, which is in the mountains right here near near Gilroy. My focus is really on land back initiatives. I'm a trained mediator and wannabe peacemaker. I work, I negotiate agreements for a living. I have a legal degree, so that's kind of how I work, how I use that in the community, mostly building bridges and negotiating agreements. And I guess lastly, not the most important thing, but I am a chairperson of the Confederation of Ohlone People. I'm the co-chair of the Pajaro Valley Indian Council and the vice president for the Santa Clara Valley Indian Health Center. I'm happy to be here today, and I hope that some of the things that we have to say are of use for everybody that's listening. Thank you. Maija?
Hello, everybody. I'm really excited about the topic we're sharing today. Just by way of introduction, I am of Latvian and German descent, and I go by she, her. I'm a mother and a wife also. I grew up in Maidu territory in northeastern California, and I now live in the Rumson and Esalen territories next to the Carmel River on the Central Coast. I'm a mediator and a facilitator of healing reconciliation when I'm invited to do so by Indigenous leaders or nations. I'm also a former attorney with 15 years of experience in nonprofit, foundation governance, and business governance. And I also am the owner of Maija West Consulting and one of the founders of the Healing and Reconciliation Institute. And it's a pleasure to be with you all. Welcome and thank you for coming. How about you, Andy?
There we go. I'll mute myself before you have to tell me. So good day, everybody. My name is Andy Kull. I am father, husband, I'm an attorney, a consultant, and a peacemaker. And I'll tell you what, if Charlene is a wannabe peacemaker, I'm like a toddler peacemaker. So, but in any event, I am actually peacemaker. And I come from Brunswick, Maine, which is Wabanaki country, the people of the dawn, although I'm coming to you at this moment from Austin, Texas, which I'm pretty sure is Comanche territory. So I am, I'm of mixed European ancestry. I'm a white guy. I have a law degree. I've been a business and commercial lawyer for about 18 years before pivoting to focus on projects that really matter, especially land back projects and Indigenous led projects and healing and reconciliation projects as well. So it's just what a pleasure it is to be here, and welcome and hello to everybody. All right.
All right, so welcome. What are we talking about today? We start with a proper introduction. Charlene welcomed us into this space, and now you're getting to know us. And we've already put this in the chat window, but feel free to let us know who you are as well. We really care about where you're calling from and the issues that matter to you. So we just open that invitation up. Today, we're going to be speaking about mediation and peacemaking. And how does that serve the communities that you're in support of, and how this tool might be used to best benefit the whole. We're going to talk about what is peacemaking. We don't want to get ahead of ourselves, and we've asked Andy to that with the tall order to do that to help us with that definition. Charlene will spend some time speaking about being a peacemaker. What does that mean? And I'll speak a little bit about designing a gathering for peacemaking. And then again, as we shared, there always is resources, so we'll share some resources, and also we'll open this up to a question and answer time, question response time with you all. So that's what we're going to do together today. So with that, I think one of the most important things as we're kind of getting into our gathering today is just making sure that you guys all feel really comfortable with asking questions. There's no question that's not appropriate for this circle. We're all learning together. And so just in really inviting you to consider that as we get into this space. One of the things that we said we would do is talk about the core values foundation of peacemaking, what it means to build peacemaking practices into governance documents, and how third-party peacemakers might help sometimes when an issue arises. But again, part of this is really about understanding that we're all kind of learning together. And so each person whose perspective is on the call today is part of our wisdom in the circle today. So just please follow Charlene's invitation and just know that you're welcome to be a part of this discussion as we go into our circle after we present. And I would say that the last thing I'll say is before I hand it over to Andy is that when we're talking about this definition of peacemaking, I think that more than ever, there's a lot of curiosity and interest into understanding how peacemaking can fit in. And sometimes I think we think of it as something that kind of happens elsewhere. And we're just inviting you all today to be a part of what it means to be a peacemaker in our conversation. So we're looking forward to going through that with you. I will hand it over to Andy to start us out on what is peacemaking, Andy?
Thanks, Maija. So really the first thing is that this right here, what we're doing right now is peacemaking. We're on a virtual platform, and of course we're on a webinar, so we have panelists over here. But we're all just want to invite everybody, just the way Charlene started us, to just consider that we're in a circle together, and simply being in a circle together is fundamentally peacemaking. The way Charlene started us with these going around the great circle with these 4 directions, and acknowledging the interdependence is peacemaking. And so it's hard to, I actually tried to cheat. I went on the Indigenous Peacemaking Initiative website looking for a definition of peacemaking. I couldn't find one. So I think it's important to look at peacemaking on a few different levels, and we'll talk a little bit about peacemaking as a way of life also. But essentially, what peacemaking itself, if you think about it from a form standpoint, again, is just simply relating to one another in a circle, which seems very simple because it is, but in most of the upbringing I've had as a lawyer in the colonial system, it's not in a circle. We're in an adversarial posture. So that small shift is huge. And whenever I get into the colonized way of thinking, which tends to be argumentative, even if I'm not hearing argumentative, is not peacemaking. So to be able to consider oneself in a circle with whoever it is that's in that particular conversation. Now, peacemaking circles, generally speaking, you're going to have a particular reason and purpose for it. So there are peacemaking many tribes have peacemaking courts. Tribal courts have peacemaking courts. I'll come back to that in a second. But using peacemaking as a dispute resolution process in a court setting is one formal definition of peacemaking. You can also use peacemaking circles. A talking circle, for example, is a peacemaking circle. And whoever's holding that circle might be considered the peacemaker in that scenario, not at the exclusion of anybody else being a peacemaker. But so you could have a peacemaking circle for the purpose of celebrating something. You could have a dispute resolution peacemaking circle. You could have a whatever the particular reason and purpose of coming together in a gathering. It could be to make a decision amongst, whatever the constituency is that's making a decision. It could be for any particular reason and purpose. But going back up again more to 30,000 feet, when I asked one of my elders about what one of my Wabanaki relatives, and of course the word peacemaking in Wabanaki country, you don't really hear that word peacemaking at all, but yet they are great peacemakers over there, which is amazing. I asked one of my elders who's a native speaker, the Wabanaki language. I said, tell me about peacemaking from a Wabanaki perspective, and he said, oh, peacemaking, right? He said, "Gachita me ta homo, gachita me ta homo." He said, that's the word. And he said, he made this gesture with his hands, and he said, that means I hold you in the utmost respect. He said, no matter what our differences are, no matter what it is that you believe or I believe, I respect you, and I'm gonna give you my attention. And then he said something that really stuck with me, which is that gachita me ta homo, that respect. He said it's a feeling. It's not an idea, it's not a concept, it's a feeling. Actually giving that respect and that attention. And so the peacemakers use terms like agree to disagree, but with respect, or the rule of respect. So there's this respect built in, but it's not like I respect you because you're my superior, or you respect me because you're my employee, or whatever it is. It's actually just respect, human respect. So at that fundamental level, we're talking about bringing that into process. So here, when we talk about peacemaking, we're talking about process, and we're talking about a way of communication, a way of bringing together in one mind, because oftentimes in the adversarial posture, we get entrenched. But when we come together in a circle, we're able to move in a different way and find commonalities and actually solve problems amongst oneself. So going back to peacemaking as a tribal court process, for example, you might have a dispute, like just call it a custody dispute or something over, where a child is going to live. And the judge might say to the parties, I'm sending you to peacemaking. They say, okay. And so they go to peacemaking. And in that case, you're going to have one, maybe two peacemakers. And these are people that are trained to hold a peacemaking circle. And in that circle will be the people that need to be there. So let's take the example of a custody dispute. So you're going to have the child. I'm assuming the child's old enough to participate. You have the child, you're going to have the parents. You might have some grandparents. You might have the kid's counselor. You might have a friend or two friends, but you're going to have people there that can contribute. And the lawyers might get kicked to the outside of the circle where they can listen but not participate. I'll tell you what, as lawyers, we don't like that, but it's actually really good. And so what happens is it's a circle, it's a talking circle, but the peacemakers will always start off intentionally, just like we did today. Charlene started us off. They might, and then it's usually the peacemakers I know like to use a basket as a talking piece. So there's going to be a talking piece, and then that's going to go around the circle, and there's going to be different rounds for different purposes. Might be introductions, might be then the peacemaker might bring the basket to one of the parents and say, tell us what the problem is, and to the other parent tell us what the problem is, and then maybe it goes around again. But that peacemaker is going to run that circle however it needs to be run in that situation. And it's incredibly successful, and the people come up with the solutions themselves. And that can be used for any type of dispute resolution. Now, that's in a court setting, but you can also, you don't have to be in a court setting. You can use the circle process in any setting whatsoever, even in a Zoom meeting, like when you're meeting with your whoever it is, you're having a meeting. Many people will run their meeting in a circle anyway, and so just sort of acknowledging that as a peacemaking. So I think the one other thing for me to mention as from a peacemaking, definition of peacemaking standpoint is that, there are many indigenous nations in this part of the world, and there are many peacemaking courts and tribes, peacemaking ways from different nations. And they have commonalities and similarities, but they're all different teachings and ways on peacemaking, of peacemaking amongst the indigenous people of Turtle Island. And so many of you on this call may have your own peacemaking ways and your traditions and your culture, and it may or may not be called peacemaking. But that's what I've been learning from my elders and my mentors in the peacemaking world, is that it connects in with those indigenous values. And we're going to come back again to the values as well in this discussion, which is a foundational part of peacemaking. So and I think just one other thing, talking about the characteristics of a peacemaker in a peacemaking circle, holding that particular circle is, one of the important things that's been discussed with me is the importance of trying to be non-judgmental and really allowing the people in that circle to come up with the answers. Because I've heard one of my mentors says, boy, I was sure I had the answer right then and there, but I bit my tongue. And sure enough, through the process itself came out something completely different, but it came out of the parties themselves. So being able to take our judgment out of it, and this is really hard. I mean, it's really hard for me training as a peacemaker, because it means undoing all of my colonial training. It means becoming really nonviolent, learning how to listen, and how to stop myself from going down my usual path. So Maija, I'm checking in with you here because I know we have a couple other elements that I'm bringing, but as far as the definition of peacemaking goes, I think we can leave it there.
Yeah.
Otherwise, I'll just start droning on.
That was great. And I'm sure there'll be questions that kind of flesh out some of the pieces of what you've shared. And so, yeah, I think that's perfect. And with your blessing, we'll move on to Charlene.
All right. Thank you, everybody. Being a peacemaker. I'll start by saying we're all peacemakers. So I think about things like, here's just a little story, and I like to tell stories. So here's just something that comes to mind when I say, I read this, being a peacemaker, and what does that mean? I think in some communities, there just isn't a word for peacemaker. Like it's not a common word that's used in your community if that's what you're brought up with. So think about the characteristics of a peacemaker and what you think about. And imagine being a peacemaker at the age of 5, for example. And some of those characteristics that your parents or your grandparents or your aunties or your uncles taught you, depending on who brought you up, right? And for me, I came from a really, really big family. My father, we'll just say my father had many children. We also had cousins and nieces and nephews that always were at our house during the summer. And then on top of that, I had aunts and uncles that were my age and around my age. My grandmother had got married late. She had one child, then got married really late. And the rest of the children were about my age. And so there could be 20 kids at our house all summer long, not a day, all summer long, because they stayed at our house. You learn to be a peacemaker really quick, and nobody calls you a peacemaker. So I think about those kinds of things, and that's actually true in Indigenous languages. There are a lot of words that we speak in English that don't really translate, and they don't translate because they didn't exist. They were just a way of life. You're supposed to be kind. Things like you're supposed to be kind. You're supposed to watch out for each other. Nobody tells you to do that. It's just supposed to happen. You go somewhere, we'll just say a picnic, for example. You always leave the place better than the way you found it, but you learn that as soon as you can walk. You know, it's time to clean up. We're done with the picnic. You always leave the place better than the condition that you found it. When you think about ceremonies, and I don't think it's just California, but because we don't have our own land, every ceremony we go to, when we're done with ceremony, so there could be hundreds of people, and there could be an arbor, and there could be a fire, and all kinds of things going on. But when we're done with our ceremony, nobody even knew that we were there, unless they can feel us, our spirit, of course, but otherwise they don't know that we're there. So when I think about peacemaking, it really is a way of life. It's how do you walk? How do you talk? What words do you use? How do you conduct yourself? And not just at home, but throughout your life, throughout your day, no matter who you're negotiating with, conversing with, right? Communicating with. But then there's also the intentional peacemaking hat, where somebody calls you a peacemaker, right? And that's actually really important, because I understand that it's just not, you know, it doesn't seem to be everywhere. There's definitely violence in this world. There's definitely unhappiness. There are definitely huge conflicts. So that's when we bring in the intentional skills of a peacemaker to help solve problems. So here's an example, and I'll share one example that we have from, you know, a sister nation, but it's an example of maybe when a peacemaker could have been helpful. And that example is where a few members of the tribe are at the table with a government entity, and they're trying to solve some problems. And after going over option after option, several meetings, we'll say 30 hours worth of meetings, approximately, and this is a real case, you still don't have resolution. You still don't have an agreement. Maybe after this meeting, you'll have a sense for some of the things that you could do so that that doesn't happen. So why peacemaking? Peacemaking, again, it's a way of life. So if you start to think about what peacemaking means and how you walk and how you talk, that's all kind of important things. But if you think about the situation that I described, and you compare it to an adversarial space where, in this case, I don't know that there was exactly an argument. There were just agreements that need to be had, and the agreements weren't being settled. So how do you recognize that you could use help? Imagine that you're sitting at a table and things aren't progressing and agreements aren't being made. And this is, we'll just say, your 5th meeting with the same government entity. Some people would walk away, some people would give up, some people would be angry, some people would be burnt out, some people would move on to another project, but you don't really have to do that. One thing you can do, which is really not a problem, is stop the meeting. I mean, it's a little bit extreme, but you can stop the meeting and make a suggestion. Suggest a third party, because that's what a peacemaker is. A specific person designated as the peacemaker is an objective third party who can help facilitate a conversation. And I think the great thing about peacemaking is when you think about decolonization, that's exactly what peacemaking is. And I think some people are a little bit surprised when they get into those conversations, and all of a sudden you're sitting, just as Andy described it, you're sitting at a table. I would suggest not having a table, and I'll share a little more information. But imagine that you're sitting at a table, or you're not at a table, but you're in a circle all of a sudden, and everybody's face to face, and everybody has an equal saying and an opportunity to speak, because perhaps there'll be a talking circle, which is one of the things that Andy described. All of a sudden, the balance of power has just been created. So that's something that a peacemaker can help you with. And it really should be a third objective party and not a person in the circle trying to run it. The other thing that I wanted to mention is when you're thinking about peacemaking and you picked somebody to provide, this facilitate a discussion, think about the location. Where will this meeting take place? And I guess when you're thinking about peacemaking, some of the things to consider is that the agreements that you come up with once a discussion is taken place, the goal is really to make it a long-term agreement. I've also done mediation, and what I'll say is, number one, if it's court mandated, it's generally not going to be a long-term agreement. It'll solve a problem for the moment, but then you're going to be mediating again and again and again, because they really are short-term solutions to huger problems, bigger problems, right? So instead, think about long-term solutions. Think about, and when I talk about long-term solutions, I'm talking about across generations. So consider in a peacemaking circle, collecting a little information and allow for healing. Think about the past. Is there any opportunity to create healing before you make a final decision to get a better understanding for what has created the situation in the first place? It's only after you collect that information and have a chance to talk about that information that you'll have a chance to really come to an agreement that everybody is happy with and will make a difference for the future, I'll say. The other thing is that peacemaking is not judgmental. And so it's a totally different frame of mind. And it doesn't matter what has happened in the past. So imagine you're not a peacemaker, but you're a participant and you're getting ready to go into a peacemaking circle. I know that some challenges that we face are very, very, very emotional. I absolutely understand that. But is there any way to go into a circle with an open mind and imagining that the solution that's about to happen hasn't even been spoken yet? Because Creator will come in and fill everybody's spirits, if they're open to it, with many options, perhaps things you haven't even thought about. And I think that a good peacemaker will allow that conversation to take place, the opening up of options. And then finally, when you're thinking about peacemaking and the environment, I really encourage people whenever possible to do it outside. If there's any way to take a circle outside, I would absolutely encourage that. And so here's an example of one, and Andy mentioned family mediation. And I did a family mediation for a couple, and I was really concerned about, you know, location. And I knew that I wanted it to be a neutral place, but I also knew that there was so much animosity that there was not much that I could do, but that creator could work some magic and make some things happen. So indeed, we went to a park. And I asked them to bring some support people, and they were set up in such a way so that it was a protected space. And sometimes that also means people aren't side by side. You can still create a circle, but just make sure people are spaced out enough so that they don't feel like their personal space is invaded. And in that way, you can have sometimes a conversation. And I will say that it was a beautiful conversation. It did require some more meetings, but the fact that you have sunshine on your face and a little breeze in your hair, like that, it's pretty magical. It's hard to be really angry with somebody else if you have a peacemaker like me who's reminding you of the beautiful place that you're in and the beautiful things that are happening, and highlighting every little highlighting every positive thing that you possibly can while the discussion is taking place. So that's kind of a little bit about the setting. And you can control that setting. As a group, you can control that setting. What will it be like? What will that environment be like? And it empowers everybody that's participating to choose the place that's best. And it could be a sacred site. It could be on the beach, alongside the ocean waves. It's whatever brings the people together and makes them feel comfortable and secure. So I'm just gonna, we weren't gonna do a survey, and we're not gonna do a survey, but we have a couple of minutes. So I wanna go ahead and just take a little poll. So if you wanna drop just a line into the chat and imagine like the most comfortable place where you would have a hard conversation. Imagine that you're trying to solve a really, really horrible problem. Perhaps it's even gone on for years and years. In this case, we'll say it's a land dispute because we're doing a lot of land dispute stuff these days. So imagine there's a land dispute. If you were about to have a conversation about a land dispute, and think about your own traditional place or your favorite place, describe the location where you'd like to have that conversation, and then just drop it in the chat. If it was up to you, where would you have that conversation? Be as specific as you want. And we'll just give everybody a second to drop it. You might even consider the time of day. So I'm going to read these out just because we're recording, and I don't know if we get comments in our recording. But Jacqueline says, in a park by water at noon. That's nice. I like that. In a field with some tree cover with a nice little breeze to keep everyone cool. That's Leticia. Teresa says, at the coast, Marshall Beach in the morning when the birds and the seals are out feeding, the sun is out, the breeze is blowing. So just imagine the settings and the descriptions and the settings that I just read. Again, Like, how can you start off angry when people arrive at such beautiful places? And I think it goes back, and I'll finish in just a minute, but I think it goes back to reminding ourselves that we are not separate from nature. We're an integral part of nature. We're an integral part of our environments. And sometimes these disputes happen because we forget that. We forget that we're just a being living here at the moment in the midst of all creation. So the power in that is going back to those places to have those difficult conversations, because at that point you're assisted by all living beings, including the wind and the shade and everything that is in the environment, such as the environments that I just described. So thank you for sharing. And hopefully we planted some seeds so far. Maija.
Thank you, Charlene. Always learning from you. Appreciate what you're sharing. Hello, everyone, again. So I'm going to speak a little bit about designing a gathering for peacemaking. As I've shared before with some of the folks that have been in these past gatherings and these webinars, I'm the daughter of a builder and married to a builder. And so I love design. And I love that there's pieces to that that can be formed like the wood studs on a house. And once the wood studs are up, you kind of get a sense of what might go in the space, but it's still a possibility. And so today I'm going to share kind of like a good layout of a home, some of the 3 different pieces of designing a gathering that I have has been learned through my own practice, but also been taught to me by some of my advisors and elders who inform my work, and also by the 2 that I'm joined on this webinar with today, and Andy and Charlene. So we're going to cover what we do before, during, and after in order to design a gathering. And I really appreciated Charlene's invitation to you all to consider setting the stage or setting the space up, and that invitation to consider that place outside. The nature can be, the natural world can be part of our peacemaking support. It can be our co-peacemaker in a circle. So one of the things that I had needed to do to get myself ready for being invited into spaces for difficult conversations was to just get myself comfortable with my own process so that I could be of service when I'm invited to come into a space. And I learned a lot from listening to others about not just focusing on the gathering itself, what's happening in that moment, but what you do beforehand and what you do after to care for that peacemaking process for the betterment of all. So designing a process that's based on what can be done before to prepare the space and the people, what can be done during to maintain a healing space where all can feel included to participate, and then what happens after to support the long-lasting nature of commitments. And that's what I'll share a bit about today. So before a gathering, managing both or kind of preparing both place and people. Regarding the people part, which is why we're together in that space, we're looking really at relationship building and inquiring into how important it is to resolve the issue for the betterment of those relationships. And this relationship building is only there if each participant cares and holds the relationship with enough care that they'll be invested in the outcome. Charlene talked about outside. I'm really appreciate that invitation. They certainly go better when I'm able to participate outside when I'm in a circle. I know personally that makes me feel better. It's that reminder of things that are bigger than us also, that I just need sometimes. Look up in the sky and see a bird flying. I'm like, okay, how can I be like that bird flying over a bad situation and looking down upon it and carrying the whole of humanity. You know, how can I outside look for references to the natural world to help give me strength as in my role that I've been invited to do, and also for the participants to be reminded of what's possible. But I also like that it's private. A healing space can bring up emotion. And so for people's comfort, for those that associate sharing emotions with feeling too vulnerable, or sometimes there's unanticipated emotions that come up that people aren't ready for when they come into a circle. Having the privacy to know that you're only sharing your emotions with those in the circle sometimes helps. So sometimes we'll do something around that so that we make sure the space won't be intruded upon during the process. We also create this invitation around identifying that the issues or challenges are we issues or challenges, that we're only bringing into that circle what needs to be handled by those in that circle. Sometimes I have a problem, but I don't need to bring it up in a space. It's just my own personal problem. I have a problem remembering to brush my teeth at night or whatever, but that's not for the circle. That has nothing to do with why we're in circle. And sometimes folks need to remember that it's not for everything. It's for the purpose of this greater good. And it's a we issue that we're all carrying together. In that role of peacemaking, and I encourage this for everyone, I also invite folks to look at the historical context of the issue. The present is not just the present is both the past and the future. And so when we're having, when there's an issue in that moment that arises, I always want to know what the historical context is, and that invitation, of course, to understand the history, so that when we're in the space, we know that it's, of course, not in just some bubble, it's part of this continuum of learning. And that comes up a lot, especially in circles with our Indigenous relations, but also in circles that have to do with other challenges. But as that invitation goes, you know, the invitation, of course, is that we need to understand the past so we can meaningfully deal with the present and the future. I'll talk about that next in terms of how we frame that in terms of core values and practices in the circle. Finally, I personally, one of my core values personally is informed consent. I've learned that as a survivor, but also because nobody likes surprises if you want a healing space. And so to create a healing space, we need to let people know what's going to happen. And sometimes it's really hard in a peacemaking circle because we don't really know always what's going to happen. In fact, most of the time, nobody knows what the solution is going to be until we go into the circle. And there's a trust in that process that I really appreciate. But it's hard to say, here's what's going to happen when you come in there, because it's not a courtroom. It's not that, it's something else. And so how do you practice informed consent, meaning telling people what they can expect to have happen before they say yes? How do we practice that? Within the organization of HRI, which is a sister affiliate to Maija West Consulting, we've come up with a visual so that we can let people know, hey, here's what's going to happen. And so I'm just going to share that with you so you can see what our visual is. This is very new. But it gives an example of what like informed consent document can look like. And I'll get to this in a second. And I'll share that towards the end when we go to Q&R so we can turn the slides off. But as we kind of get into what it means to say, it's not just showing up for the circle, people. It's showing up for the circle already within your heart, thinking, what type of commitment can I make to help support the resolution of this issue, the healing of this harm? And that there's a way to think about how do we design our lives in a way that allows room to make a priority commitment to the person I have harmed in that space. How do I create a space for saying yes, that's going to be a real yes after what we hear in the wisdom of that circle in that peacemaking process? And I have found, especially with non-Indigenous folks, that there's a real need to think about how big of a priority are you going to make this, what you might say yes to in that circle, because it requires us to think more than short term and to help support that long view thinking. Can you make a commitment that's going to last for your lifetime? Can you make a commitment that'll last for your child's lifetime? What would it take to say yes? And what else might you need to come to that circle in a way that allows you to say yes for your child's lifetime? Wow, that's a different level of commitment. And so for myself, that has led really needing to think about what I agree to and take it really seriously. And so we invite everyone in the circle to do the same, so that when they make those commitments, they might feel very small, but the ripple effect is very big because you're making it based on this timeline that's profoundly long and is also addressing the past. Okay. During the gathering, we've shared a little bit about this, of course, starting with prayer, an opening, an invitation for all, whatever your religious background or denomination or practice, starting with the sacred, starting with a way to bring us all into the space together is so important. In our practice, we also, this is something that Andy spoke to, is core values. So we call them invitations or agreements in our circles. And when I do this practice is to, what are we going to agree to behave ourselves? Are we going to interrupt each other? Are we going to agree that we've asked this person to come in and help us and what might be necessary in order for everybody to feel comfortable? And usually that's up for the group, but there are a few that come up that are really common that I like to share because they seem to be ones that are kind of new for some people. And I'll put one of those in the chat window right now. This one is called Listening for Understanding. And so this is one of the invitations that we ask people to say yes to. We share what they are, and the invitation is to invite everybody in the group to agree. And so this one I'll share and read out loud. We ask that we listen to one another with openness and curiosity and honor the vulnerability and courage that this takes. We ask ourselves to listen to one another from the heart, giving one another the benefit of doubt through connecting to our shared humanity. So that's an example, or, of one that we have found helpful. The opposite of listening for understanding is, of course, listening for your counterattack, which is more of an adversarial process. And this also implies that each perspective in the group matters. So anyway, that's one thing that I've really found is been helpful in the spaces that I've had a chance to work in, is that one in particular. So feel free to use that however you like. And then, of course, after a gathering, after we do a close, what we're really looking for is that follow-up of commitments, things, beautiful and sacred things were shared in a peacemaking circle. And then what are you going to do with that information? And this role, this is the hardest part sometimes. When we look at a space needing to be a healing space, for some folks, life can feel highly stimulating, if not outright traumatic, just going through life. And in that experience, our brains can sometimes signal to us a freeze response or a disassociation response, which means we don't remember what we said the day before. And that's very real. And so for some folks who have a tendency to do that when they're under stress, of course, the first thing is acknowledging it. But sometimes people will build practices around their self-love of just whatever their stress response is. And so if that is a freeze response or a disassociation response to a hard conversation, some people I know that have that one, I have mine, but mine's not that one. But for my friends that have that, sometimes what they do is they have to write it down right away. And they write it down while they write it down. And so sometimes in a peacemaking process, we invite folks to take notes if that's their response, because that way they can remember later that which is hard to hear in the moment. But later, when they're calm and their bodies are back to a more calm nervous system, they can respond then. And then most importantly is memorializing those commitments in the form of agreement. And those agreements come from all the different cultures, have different ways of documenting that. Of course, in our colonial law, we have written agreements, and we have the courts, like Andy was speaking to. Sometimes a settlement in a criminal case or a tribal court case would get referred to the judge to get the stamp. Okay, the settlement happened. And that in that same way, there's other ways that agreements between two people, whether that's a family, such Charlene was mentioning, a custody challenge, there can be other types of documenting. But that resulting agreement often looks the same, but it usually incorporates those core values that were included in the original circle. So those are the ones that I have done. There's, like Andy was sharing, there's all kinds of circles for all kinds of different things, and Charlene was sharing more. But that is part of the process before, during, and after. And Andy had some thoughts around that is peacemaking. So perfect segue, because I shared just one kind of specific example of one, and there's a million. So Andy, I'm going to pass it back over to you before we go to our question and responses.
Okay, great. Thanks, Maija. Also, Maija, I just emailed you a graphic that I think would be good to share with the group, and it's a great resource. This is a cheat card, basically, that Cheryl Fairbanks produced, and it's just one very simple structure for holding a peace circle. And one of the things that she always says is be tough on the issue, but gentle on the person. And that dovetails with that rule of respect. And I love the way that that the peacemakers can do that so skillfully, and can be, they don't shy away from any issue. They meet things head on. And at the same time, always have respect for that person. All right, so Maija, you can share that when you get a chance. And then and Charlene teased me because I'm always saying, well, that's peacemaking. Well, look, that's peacemaking over there. And I just want to encourage all of us to celebrate the peacemakers that we find in life and find around. I met a gentleman who's a language teacher and works with different people in the language. And I was like, oh my God, you're a peacemaker, bringing together different types of people to learn language. And that's peacemaking. And then even in our own everyday life and how we go about our meetings, for example, as an attorney, I'm always meeting with people, or as a consultant, and I've really had to stop. Saying we started. I was in a peacemaking, in a planning meeting with some peacemakers recently, and I had come from just a meeting with a client. Everybody just wants to jump in and start, and I'm trying to work skillful ways to actually stop and start intentionally, the way I'm been training as a peacemaker in every meeting, everything where I have the ability. And I find it changes, completely transforms the character. But anyway, I was saying that to this one of my colleagues who's a peacemaker. And I said, well, how people just want to jump in to a meeting and then it just goes, and I really have to stop and try to start intentionally. And she said, no, I don't. I don't. And it was just such a beautiful thing to see that in her culture, in the way that she does everything. They stop and they start intentionally. They start with a prayer. And like Cheryl always reminds me, it can be a prayer, it can be a song, it can be a poem, it can be silence, it can be whatever works. And to be skillful with the people that we're working with too. Like Charlene was saying, it's a ceremony. Peacemaking is a ceremony, and yet, we may know that as peacemakers, but we don't have to tell everybody, hey, this is a ceremony, although some people may know that. So depending on where we are, just to acknowledge that circle and that situation. And again, the more I learn about peacemaking, the more I learn from the peacemakers, the more I'm able to see peacemaking everywhere. Land back transactions are not transactions, land back relationships and land back scenarios are peacemaking. All of the healing and reconciliation work is peacemaking. And in fact, when we integrate that peacemaking as a way of life, then everything we do actually becomes peacemaking. So, all right, so we got a half an hour, Maija, so we got time for questions and answers.
Wonderful. So we're going to go ahead and go into that, and we're going to invite everybody to join us as a panelist. And before we do that, I'm just going to share one last document. So Hajar, if you don't mind turning off your screen share, I'm going to go ahead and share this one doc. And we're doing this in there. And while I'm getting into this document, also know that I've already put in that document that Andy just mentioned. That's from Cheryl Fairbanks. You'll see that in there, and I'll invite Andy to go ahead and add her name to the chat window so you can see who it's connected to. Okay.
Yep. And if I could just ask people not to share that also, because I didn't actually ask Cheryl if I could share this. So just use it for yourself, and I'll check in with her. I'm sure she doesn't mind.
Well,
all of my lawyer red lights are flashing, but I know she'd be happy with it.
No problem. Thank you, Andy. And thank you. One of the things that Andy's speaking to is the discomfort around sharing Indigenous knowledge without consent. One of the things that I will share, Andy, is that there is a slide deck of Cheryl Fairbanks online, readily available to the public. And I think it includes this slide, but I'll double check too, but just respect Andy's wishes. And if we can confirm that when we send out the email and follow up to today's gathering, we'll make sure that you receive that as well. And for those of you who are listening or watching on YouTube, you're welcome to search Cheryl Fairbanks' name up and find what other nuggets of wisdom you can find out about her online. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and share this now. Okay, I just want to make sure that everybody can see this. This is our what we call our informed consent document, and this speaks to that before, during, and after. Before is the preparation phase, the second phase, listening, and the third phase, commitments. And this is an example of a tool we use before we enter into a peacemaking process, so that everybody feels like they have a sense of what's going to happen. And like preparing for the unexpected is kind of the challenge, but we talk a little bit about the process, and then we also share more about what people might feel during the process. And that seems to help with just giving people that peace of mind that they're coming into a space where they're not going to be surprised or feel something that they haven't really signed up for. Okay. All right, it's time for us to stop our recording. All of those YouTube listeners and watchers, thank you for joining